One of the roles that I'm really proud of doing is I'm president of INSEAD's Global Directors Network. So not only am I passionate through my own business about boards, diversity on boards, standards of organisations and so on, but really, really passionate about developing an appropriate cadre of executives and directors going forward, and have been working in this field for a number of years. So it seemed logical to agree to sponsor this. This is a topic particularly around women, but we're broadening it out from women, that has been around for many, many years. We're now starting to get traction, which Denise will talk to us about, but we also need to get more traction if we are to achieve the targets that have been set on a voluntary basis. So I'm lucky to have a panel to moderate in Ollie, who is here from Accenture. He's Senior MD for the UK and Ireland, and they have gone on public record of saying they will achieve 50% by 2025. Yay! So he will give us his insights into why that is important from both a business and philosophical viewpoint. I also have Anne Minto, who I have known for a long time. And Anne has been both a seasoned executive in some major organisations and now a non-executive across a wide range of organisations such as Tate & Lyle and Shire and many others. And she does take on that mantle of chairing remuneration committees, which we also know is very difficult these days. So Anne's also going to share her insights with us and perhaps a little view on whether quotas or not. And then I have Baroness Ruby McGregor-Smith, who again is a very seasoned CEO and also a serial non-exec director in both the public, private and governmental space. So I'm hoping that with the panel that we've managed to assemble, and I was delighted when I approached people and they all freely said they would do it, I'm really hoping we can bring a richness to this debate so that we move from just talking about it to saying what are some of the things that we can all commit to doing in the organisations that we are a part of in order to really get a huge impetus behind it and take it forward. But I would like to hand over to Denise, who's going to give us an insight into the recently published research.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to just step out from here and bring with me my rather ramshackle set of notes. Not because I don't know much about this subject, you'll be pleased to hear, but it actually is now so huge and we know so much about it that I could probably talk from now to Christmas, and it just depends on the audience and pitching it exactly right. But first of all, thank you very much to Helen and Florence, INSEAD and Board Excellence, for asking me to speak tonight, and all of you and other panel members. I just want to say that the UK's been on a bit of a journey since 2011 on this subject, and I'll talk a bit about this. But I think the first thing to say is, although our focus is FTSE 350 companies in terms of the review, the Hampton-Alexander Review and the target, so we've discovered huge read across on this subject between the enablers and barriers to people who are different, whether it is in government, in education, in professional services, in charities, public sector, the arts, whatever. So, and the ripple effect actually for what we're doing and the learning is beginning to translate out from business into other sectors. We have 8 female bishops now appointed, and just 5 or 6 years ago, we had none. First Vice-Chancellor of Oxford University in 700 years, second female president of the CBI, and we're on our second, for the moment, female Prime Minister in the UK too. So, and although my focus is very much on gender, and I think that'll be largely what we're talking about tonight, needless to say, all efforts to encourage people who are different, be that race, ethnicity, LGBT, disability, and social mobility, are welcome and very much part of the fix we need to the culture of UK business. So the UK's story is a pretty fledgling one, but not just one of women inspiring women, but now women starting to change cultures and the very art of what women themselves, but more importantly business, thought was possible. Just to flip back to 2011 and the journey we started with Lord Davies and the Davies Review, of which I was a founding member of that steering group, we set about intentionally not to go on a quota route, although it was hotly debated at the time, and decided we wanted to give business leaders a chance to make progress under their own steam, and it was better to educate, elevate, and influence than it was to force via a compliance route. And so far, it has proved to have worked for us. It was an all-inclusive stakeholder approach, which was really, really important. So we didn't just bring in chairmen, it was around boards only, so firstly FTSE 100 boards, then extended in the second year to FTSE 350 boards. It wasn't just chairmen, it was also we've had recommendations for government, for the FRC, we had recommendations for headhunters, for investors, and many, many others. And that was pretty key and unique, actually, to everything to other frameworks that have been implemented around the world to our success. Arguably, I would say the most sophisticated approach in the UK of any other country, and certainly now where we are, the deepest and the widest of any other country. We've got insights into this subject, which I'm sure will come out during the panel debate, that had we gone down a legislative compliance route, we would just not have had. We've had to work really, really hard in the UK to understand what is happening, what are the complex and compounding barriers that are preventing women progressing to the top in the UK. And because of that, in actually a very short time, in only 5 or 6 years, we have got enormous learnings and insight on this subject. So we always, a couple of things that we did right and we would be well to hold on to, although clearly the world is changing. We taught the business case. We only ever talked about a business case because that was the language of business. And it's important to mirror the language of people that you're trying to influence. So we talked about choosing from the whole talent pool and the benefit of diverse perspectives and competing on the global stage for Britain, which arguably now with Brexit is even more important than ever. And modernising the image of British business and just improving the all-round performance of our top teams. A very positive approach, the need to reflect our customer and employee base. We didn't talk fairness, we didn't talk meritocracy, we didn't talk the huge underemployment of women in the UK. But clearly we could have done. And so roll the clock on to 2015. Importantly, we set a target, and a target, whether you like them or not, they help people who have other things to do and who don't really understand this subject know what good looks like and gives them something to aim for. It's also, importantly, the language of business. When we started this, we had in the FTSE 350 152 all-male boards, and now we've got 9 today. So that in itself is phenomenal progress. If you can imagine the change that has happened, the revolution that has happened in many of those boardrooms from an all-male environment to one that is now inclusive of females. And some 600 women have been appointed to FTSE 350 boards in that time. That frankly, without this initiative and the efforts of all of our stakeholders, those really talented women, capable women would have been sat in the wings waiting for their right place at the table. So we have made great progress. For sure, we haven't gone as far as we'd like to go. But this has converted as well, importantly, from in my time, and I think in this last decade, from a hushed water cooler conversation in the corridors. And it was, many will remember that. Some of you will be too young, but others will remember that. To one where events like today and where we talk very, very openly, or starting to talk very openly, about this topic. So just flipping on, so the Hampton-Alexander Review hit 25% in 2015, and the Davies Review target of 25%, and the Hampton-Alexander Review is the successor review to that. We continued the work on boards, increasing the target from 25 to now 33%. So all FTSE 350 boards are tasked with 33% of women on their boards by 2020. At the moment, we're at 27.7%. So ticking up, but slowly. Importantly, the review has now gone down below the boards into the executive layers. So executive committees and direct reports combined for the FTSE 350 again. Firstly, we did the FTSE 100 and then extended it out. So now we are encompassing some 23,000 of arguably the most senior roles in our biggest businesses. And the challenge, I think, that has been set for those companies now is really quite a significant one. But at the same time, we should be rightly proud of the scope and scale of what we're trying to do in the UK. It is really impressive, and when you compare us to countries like Norway, which I hear every day of the week, and of course they're at 38-39%, their index is only 25 companies. And the one that's at the top of the table, which is France, is only 40 companies. We're doing this across 350 companies, and we've gone down 2 layers. So I think, there's overwhelming support for the direction of travel in the UK, and the visibility, as you will all know, on gender and the imbalance in the workplace is higher than it's ever been. And I do think now this is a watershed moment, and there is an appetite for real change. There's an impatience creeping in, which I think is a very good thing. But progress, when we look, and I'm sure all of you in this room will agree with me, is much slower than any of us would have liked to see. The good news is that the FTSE 350 companies have voluntarily collected and submitted this data to us via an online portal. So BoardX, again, is easy because board data is public data. You take a cut on any particular day of the year you want, and anybody can do that, and you publish it. We've had to write out and ask 350 companies to give us this data. We did it last year, and about half of them did. This year, every company, except for 10, gave us their data. That in itself is massive progress. And we could see from the scrambling that was going on behind the scenes that many of these companies were just gathering this data for the very first time. The important thing is when it comes out to us and it's public data and we've published it in the rankings by individual company, it goes to the top table, it goes to the executive committee, it goes to the board, and all of that starts to get the visibility, the transparency and the action that we're hoping for. And the UK, as I said, our sophisticated approach with just absolutely awash with research. There were 46 pieces of research published in the UK on this topic alone last year by really good, credible houses. We're not short of research. And you combine that with gender pay gap and the increased visibility that's bringing with the reporting deadlines for next year and the gradually increasing investor pressure that's coming down. I think we are starting to lay some foundations for real change. So today, most business leaders would complain that they get it, actually, and are making strenuous efforts to recruit and retain women in senior positions. This hasn't yet translated through into a kick-up in numbers, but I'm pretty sure we're well placed for that very soon to happen. So let's just turn to progress and what we put out this year in our second year. So I'm going to use a bit of a sporting analogy here because we all love those. So it could be ball in the back of the net, or it could be, one up at half time, or maybe game of 2 halves. No, it's going to be a netballing analogy because I see lots of former players in the audience, and I just say all the players in 1/3 of the court. So we're seeing 1/3 of companies doing really, really great things. There's another 1/3 that we're slightly hopeful for, but not yet shifting the die. And the last 1/3 are it's a quiet area. So let me give you a few stats. On leadership, so this is the executive committee and the direct reports. We've got 55 companies that are already at 33% women leadership or over, and another 60 companies that look like they're about to achieve that. Our top 10 best performing companies, and remember what I said about Norway, and they take 25. Our top 10 best performing companies in the FTSE 100 are over 35%. Our top 10 performing companies in the FTSE 250 are at over 41%. So some are clearly working really hard on this agenda and have been doing for some time. And then at the same time, we have the last third with less than 20% women in the leadership teams and 54 all-male executive committees. I mean, I can't imagine that. 54 all-male executive committees in the FTSE 250. Women on boards, FTSE 100's at 27.7, as I said, looking like it's going to make the 33% target, so that's really good. Again, not a dissimilar position where we've got a third of FTSE companies doing really great stuff. We've got something like 130 of the FTSE 350 companies who look like they're well on track, if not already there, to hit the 33% target in 2020. Our top 10 best performing boards in the FTSE 100 are all over 40%, and our top 10 FTSE 250 performing boards are all over 42%. At the same time, we've got 10 all-male boards, still, 9 actually today, and about 135 companies still well below 25%, with one woman on their board. They've had one woman on their board for a very long time and are way adrift from the target. So the gap between companies working hard on this agenda and those not is getting ever wider, actually. Sector appears not to be the barrier at all that many think it is, or would like to believe it is. There are leaders and laggards in every single sector, but a clear set of data, a plan of action, a small set of really impactful initiatives, ambition in the organisation and ambition in the leader are what seems to matter most. So I would just say that, continued success, if we're to hit this target, it requires action from everybody and every company, every FTSE 350 company, and all our stakeholders need to play their part. And some are just going way too slow to address the engender balance. We do need a step change. We need to see not 1 in 3, which is what we've talked about so far. We need to see about 40% of all appointments now going to women over the next 3 years. Almost 1 in 2 of the available positions that we see at exec committee and leadership and on boards across all of the FTSE 350 going to women. So I think if we look back at where we were, we probably expected something evolutionary. I think in places we've seen revolution, but I think arguably progress is going way too slow, and we all just want to up the pace. The voluntary approach, however, has served us well. We've just got to get everybody playing their part, and we seriously need to pick up the pace. So I'd say going forward from here, the foundations and the climate are set fair, and the goal and benefits clearly to British business and to the economy are in sight and within reach. And 2018 must be the year where we really start to see a gear change.
What I'd like to do is invite each of my panel to give some insights. And given that one of Denise's comments was a lot of businesses now get it, I'd like to start with Ollie and Ollie's business, because he has said very clearly, not only will we be ahead of some of the stats we're seeing at the moment, so some of the best are doing 40+%, but Accenture is saying we're going for 50. Ollie, over to you. Right. Yes.
So does everyone know who Accenture is? So I just started with that. So Accenture actually isn't quoted, it's not in the FTSE 350, it's quoted in New York. It's a $35 billion thing, employs 400 and something thousand people globally, and does everything from strategy for people through to running their business operations. So it's quite a broad thing. If there's anything which it's centric to, it's helping people where business meets technology, so the whole digital revolution sort of thing. So that's it. Our CEO sits in France, a guy called Pierre Nontem, and I look after the UK and Ireland, which is the second biggest market for Accenture. And UK and Ireland together employs about 13,500 people. So hopefully that gives you something about who we are. Let me go to the 50-50 straight away. And the statement is about the whole workforce being 50-50 by 2025, just to be clear. And why did we do this? Actually, I suppose the first question is why we came out and did it publicly as opposed to did it privately. And actually that would be a function of Pierre Nontem. And I think, Denise, you said earlier on about leadership needing to step out. Well, he has a view that unless actually leadership is visibly stepping out, then actually it probably doesn't happen as much. So he just goes out there and he says it, which actually then forces the organisation in all sorts of ways to follow, because it's out in the public domain. He, before he did the 50-50 thing, he said we're killing rating systems and normal distributions of how we're going to do things for people, so we're going to change that. And he did it before we worked out how we were going to change all that. But funnily enough, 6 months later, we had worked it out because he'd said it publicly. So yeah, why were we public? Because public drives change and transparency drives change. Why do we do it from a business case perspective? Well, there's a whole myriad of reasons. It starts off somewhat because clients would expect us to actually be diverse. And often we all sit in rooms where it would be really strange if we didn't turn up looking 50-50. And we've lost competitions where we have not been diverse enough. So you sort of learn a few things. But actually, in the whole relationship with the client, it's really kind of important that you have the balance of people in the room. The next part of the business case is just access to talent. And actually, why would you minimise your access to talent rather than maximise it? And just to bring that to life, when we go to university and we recruit about 500 graduates a year, we recruit more women than men in the consulting side of our practice, because actually that's what the talent pool looks like. It'd be slightly strange if we didn't do that. So if we made statements like we're going to be 43, something or other, it would be odd, because actually from a talent perspective, we are just trying to maximise our opportunity in the marketplace. The last thing I'd say sort of in the business case is how the nature of work is changing, or maybe we've only recognised it's changing. That actually, if you look at what's happening now in terms of how people think about how you collaborate, how you co-create, how you innovate, how you do all of those things, you need an equal balance of feminine and masculine attributes. Now, that's easier to do if you have an equal balance of men and women. And I'll come back to the reason I went masculine and feminine attributes, because I do need to talk about the men in this at some point. But actually, the nature of the work we do demands actually there's this equal balance. So if you need that equal balance, what statement do you make? 50-50. And actually the last point, and it wasn't so much the business case, it's if you want to get more women in leadership, and you have a shape of organisation in terms of numbers of women which looks a bit like this, and you're sort of trying to progress this thing upwards, that's a slow exercise. If you can actually start making the thing look like this and push it, you can get much more momentum in terms of change. And to some extent, our organisation was just bored with the slow pace of change. We could have described ourselves as brilliant in how we handled diversity, but actually we could also describe how we need to dramatically improve, and we're only on the foothills, really. And we just were impatient, so we're just trying to speed it up. Do you mind if I keep going for a bit?
Sure.
So I was going to talk a bit about how we think about it and how we'll get there, or hope to get there, if that's interesting to folks. And I'd split it between numbers and culture. Now, in a numbers sense, we don't have an immediately easy task, because we're not a business which has numerous call centres and numerous shops, and actually ones where we go, well, actually, we are 50-50, but actually you find all the women are at much lower levels in the organisation. In fact, our organisation, because we're in technology, you'll find a lot of the more junior people are men who are coding stuff, and they're more attracted to coding stuff than women are. So we actually, the 50-50 is a bigger challenge in what we're trying to create. And the one thing, and I think the reports all say it, that we've clearly learned is to get to the 50-50 is not a matter about having a diversity department. And to be clear, we do have an inclusion and diversity group who nurture all sorts of networks, including a women's network and family network and an African Caribbean network and so on that goes on. But if actually that's what we relied on, we'd never get anywhere in actuality. We had to embed all of this in how we do every single process from recruitment through to development and so on and so forth. And also we run huge amounts of analytics. So I was saying numbers quite deliberately because we kind of measure everything. And what you find out when you measure everything is actually the issue is not women leaving the business. Women are more loyal to the business than the men are. So our attrition rates of men are higher than women. That's not our issue. I mean, our issue effectively is twofold in numbers terms. One is actually women aren't terribly attracted to a technology career as a generalisation. And if I've insulted anybody in here, I apologise. It won't be the first time tonight, probably. But so that's a big issue. And the other point is actually we're a growing business, and we hire a lot of experienced people. And the market for those experienced people tends to be more masculine than it is feminine. And again, taking the remember we're 70% technology, it sort of comes out that way. So in numbers terms, we have to think about we have to start really early, getting more women attracted into the sorts of things we do. We'll have done last year, and we're doing it again this year, we'll have invited 2,000 female school kids to come along and see what this stuff is all about and get them excited. I mean, it's girls in STEM, if you like. And we do lots of things like that just to encourage more women into the types of things we do. And that eventually will help. On the experience hire side of life, there's very obvious things like, and I remember when I made this pronouncement, I said, I'm not going to hire anybody as a senior person into the business unless there's an equal slate of men and women that we are looking at. And the headhunters go, excuse me? It's quite clear, I thought. So you had to get down to that sort of thing. And because actually a lot of the marketplace doesn't work to get to 50-50, so you have to make it quite plain that's where you're going. And you have to work on programs like returner programs, giving women the confidence to come back to work when they've been out of it for a bit. You have to do all these things. It's not rocket science, but you have to do all of those things, and you have to do them at some scale. And hopefully from a numbers point of view, we'll do the 50-50. On the culture side of life, which is equally important, we do all the unconscious bias stuff. And we found actually, just so you know, that it particularly works when you train and retrain people just about the time when they're making talent decisions, because then they remember. It's amazing actually how you see results change by just when any business is about to make the talent decisions, run your unconscious bias training and you get a completely different result. But that tells you something about it's a sort of hygiene factor. It's a good hygiene factor, but it is a hygiene factor. And you've got to do more than that. And so now we work on what we mean by meritocracy and what we mean by our leadership DNA. And if you started looking at those things, you would see that actually they are very strong on feminine attributes. Doesn't mean the male attributes have just got lost, but there's balance of. So, Graham, you and I were talking about the savannah just a few minutes ago. Historically, meritocracies look a bit like, are you a mammoth killer? Yes or no? And do a bit less on, are you a society builder? Yes or no? And actually, the merit will come from a balance of those things. And actually, if you get a balance of those things, you actually get a better result, funnily enough, than if you have any one of those things. So we push very hard on that now. And indeed, our leadership DNA is a very overt thing against which people are now assessed from a 360-degree point of view. But there's also this sort of equality of he for she and she for he that we are trying to get to. And when I started in this job, if you turned up to International Women's Day, it would have felt a bit like this room. In fact, there's too many men in this room to have felt just like the first International Women's Day I turned up to, because there was me and one other in a room of 400. Which is quite daunting, but you know how that feels the other way around, I think. And so it was a very good learning experience for me. I'll go through that later. But actually now we have a rule that it's got to be 50-50. So for a woman to come to International Women's Day, they must bring a bloke with them. and because the change is not going to come about because women do all the running. It will come about because men do a lot of the running. And by that I mean we're trying to get to a place where men come out. And you may go, what did you just say? The archetypal man doesn't really represent any men. There's probably one or two, but most men that I know actually have some balance of feminine and masculine attributes, that actually they kind of would like some of the choices that they see women making, but culturally they can't do that. So one of the things that we as a business are trying to work on is for men to feel that they can make some of the same choices, that actually they can come out and be who they are. And if they come out and be who they are and they start making some of the same choices that women make, then this 50-50 thing becomes much easier. So when we did shared parental leave as an example, we could have argued ourselves to the maternity leave being a particular thing and the paternity leave being a little less generous, and we actually said that's not what we want to do. We want it to be an equal thing. We want to encourage men to take shared parental leave. We've had over 150 people now do it, and in the last year, in the last year. And suddenly now they have an appreciation of some of the choices. And so the conversations in the business just improve. I probably talked for long enough, but that's where we're going with 50-50. It's a numbers thing, but it's a very heavily a cultural thing. And if we get it right, we'll have women getting to all the right places, but actually we'll have men as well getting the value of diversity, and we'll be a much more productive place.
Excellent. Thank you, Ollie. That's been a really useful insight in terms of what you're doing at all levels within the organisation and how you're making it really systemic in the organisation, which is absolutely key. I'd like to invite Anne to give us some of her insights now, if I may, and then after that I'll invite Ruby, and then we'll throw it open to the floor, if that's okay with everybody.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to stand because I can't see half the people in the room. I'm not as tall as Oliver. Anyway, thank you very much for coming, everybody, tonight, because this is a very important topic. And I have been asked to be a little bit more controversial and talk about some of the issues around quotas. So I want to make one comment first to Denise, because Denise and her team have really done a fantastic job. So anything I say tonight does not take away in any way from the work that Denise and Lord Davis, whom I know well, have absolutely done a super job. But I think, for many people in this room, I'm sure you must have shared a disappointment, as I did, when we saw the Hampton-Alexander review, that the numbers had stayed pretty static. I think we've made some excellent progress. If you look at the numbers from sort of 2011, when we only had 12.5% of women in FTSE 100 boards, to the 27.7% of this year. I think that one could allow for a certain, period of time in which you're pulling people along. This is the new world, guys and girls, and mainly guys waking up. And you have to sort of get a new DNA going in a lot of these companies. But now that with it, so much work has been done by Denise and now with Philip Hampton fronting it up, that one would think that people would be getting this by now. But clearly, there is a cohort of people who are not getting it. So, is it time to start looking at setting targets for the UK? It's something that we've always shied away from, and shied away, in my opinion, for very good reasons, some of which Denise has already articulated. But do we follow the example of our continental and Scandinavian cousins in France and Norway that have already been mentioned, and set realistic targets that chairmen and CEOs will be held accountable for, or still stay well clear of it, as our American cousins have, who think that any idea of quotas is just the biggest bad news story out? I'm sure that many of you will have seen this week that Vera Jourova, the EU Commissioner, has now come out to say that the EU will be looking at setting a 40% target. Now, she's going to have some tough competition in the EU to get that through, because the EU, the UK may not be participating in that debate, but the Germans, the Dutch and the Swedes, who have all voted consistently against quotas, will have to be brought around. And the overall target for women on boards in the EU is still quite low at 22.7%. So there is a long way to go. And as I said, it seems to me that, while some chairmen of FTSE 100 companies have really got to grips with the fact that women do actually make up 50% of the workforce, surprise, surprise, others, as we've heard from Denise, are quite frankly doing precious little. However, there are shining examples of companies like Diageo, whom I've always admired. They've been long recognised for bringing on large cohorts of women. They've worked at their junior, their middle management. They didn't just suddenly waken up one day and think, who can we put onto the exco and the board? They had a stock and a whole pipeline of women coming through. And that's what we've got to see. And it is very encouraging to hear Oliver's comments about the things that they are doing in Accenture, particularly when they employ such a large cohort of women. It's in addressing the internal succession planning and increasing that pipeline of talented female executives seems to me to be the only way that the overall board numbers will eventually increase. Virgin Money's CEO, Jane Ann Gowda, has made a public commitment that they will have a gender-balanced workforce by 2020. That is a very brave and bold statement. And she, together with her chairman, Irene Dorner, are, as far as I know, the only female combo at the top of any FTSE 100. There are just 7 female executives, chief executives in the FTSE 100, and a report last year by the High Pay Centre and the CIPD pointed out that as a FTSE 100 chief executive, it's more likely that your name is David than actually being a woman. I'm very fortunate to sit on the board of Shire. And although I was the only woman when I first joined that board in 2010, we now have Susan Kilsby as our excellent chairman, and we have 3 women non-execs. At Tate & Lyle, we have 2. We've just lost Liz Airy, chairman of Jupiter, who's been our SID and was an absolutely outstanding SID. We have 2 women NEDs on the board of EXL in New York, and we are pushing to get a 3rd. And can I say to you, what a significant difference having a real cohort of women makes on a board. The dynamics, the discussion styles, the contribution, it just changes it very significantly. As stated in the Hampton-Alexander report, less than a third of FTSE 350 roles went to women in the last year. And as Denise mentioned, it falls very far short of what's required for the 40% of appointments that we would have to make between now and 2020 if we are going to reach the target. It is a tall order in my view, and based on past performance, can we really get those boards who are still operating all male boards to really step up to the plate? If we can't achieve that, then I think we may have to start looking at setting quotas and removing the sometimes seen stigma that women would feel if they had only been appointed to fill a quota. We've always believed in the UK in the voluntary approach, and the targets set have been the highest and the boldest of any other country in the world. So don't forget that. So we might think this is a gloomy picture, but actually we have worked extremely hard in this country to get where we are. But it's the achieving of those 2020 and beyond. You know, a 40% quota perhaps for 2025. How realistic is that? Vince Cable came closest to considering quotas in 2015 in this country and finally backed off. The French, as we've heard, have their quotas and they have managed to raise that level to 37.1%. And we have to caveat that by the numbers of companies, the size of the companies. But still, it is an achievement and we can't ignore it. I think the public sector have done better in some areas than the public sector, than the private sector, I beg your pardon, especially in universities where there is already a target set for all university courts to have 50-50 representation. It will require companies to do a much better job of internal succession planning and managing that whole talent pipeline to get more women to come through to ExCo and onto the boards. This, in my view, is the number one priority for all ExCos and boards, because frankly, some companies are just not doing enough, and they're not doing a good enough job in this area. The appointments and use of executive search firms are critical both in the search and appointment of women into executive and non-executive roles, with CEOs and chairmen putting much more pressure on them to look further and deeper for candidates. Kate Gussing's here tonight. She's a star in this area. More senior women in board roles need to be mentored and supported. You cannot have just the queen bee. I got there, so it doesn't really matter if anybody else gets. We have an obligation as senior women to mentor those coming behind us. And can I tell you, out of my portfolio life, this is the thing that gives me the deepest joy and pleasure. I have 3 women currently, all very different backgrounds, making it on to non-exec positions. And indeed, one is already a chief executive of quite a large publishing company in this country. On the boards that I sit on, succession planning is not a once-a-year event. You know, let's wheel in the chief executive of the HR function and let's have a little discussion. It is something which is mainstream. It is regularly on the agenda. It is always on the NOMSCO, and that is true of all 3 companies, because the women on the board have said this needs to be a priority for our company. We cannot continue just to let it drift. We have to actively manage that. As Oliver's mentioned, more women need to be encouraged into the STEM subjects. And we saw in the Hampton-Alexander report excellent examples of companies like Sky, BAE Systems, really pushing that area. Because it has to be said that a lot of the large MD roles in companies are often still highly technical roles. And traditionally, it's men who have gone into those areas. So the more women that we can push through into those areas, I think the better it will become. However, there are examples around the world of women leading large technology-based companies like Mary Barra at General Motors or Meg Whitman at Hewlett-Packard. They were all recently very conveniently forgotten when 2 men from Yahoo raised a gender discrimination claim, which some of you may have read about. And their lawyer stated to the New York Times that men are not actually getting a fair shake of the stick, actually.
at technically based companies. No eyebrows are going to be raised, said John Parsons, the lawyer involved, if a woman heads up a fashion company. But we are talking about women staffing positions in auto companies, where it cannot be explained other than pure manipulation that they got into those jobs. I mean, if we've got people who actually think like that in our organisations, is it any wonder that we are where we are? This, of course, was only gazumped further by quotes from a Silicon Valley executive who thinks that women's brains are not wired to be able to work in Silicon Valley high-tech companies. The all-male executive committees, which were highlighted in the Hampton-Alexander report, should be utterly ashamed of themselves. If we all vote with our wallets, ladies, avoiding a filling station owned by one oil and gas company, withdraw our accounts and investments from another bank and investment company, maybe they'll get the message, because actually it takes some real proactive activity. It's simply shocking in 2017 that we need to address this with more, not just a little bit of haste, but real haste, that we have got 10 companies whose exco have no women in them. And if we continue to allow this to happen, quotas will be the only route that can be taken. Thank you.
Some common themes already coming through about organisations making very public commitments to dealing with this, organisations doing it in a very systematic way and very proactively making sure that actions are taken in order to bring equal numbers, maybe higher numbers, of the appropriate talent through to the exco and the board. If we don't do that, that's going to present significant issues, not only for the performance of the business, but also we could end up with quotas. Yeah. And then that does, as Anne mentioned there, lead to a stigma. Are you there? And certainly in my time, Anne, and your time I know, and Ruby's, there was a view, if you were on the board, oh, well, you're the token woman. Mm-hmm. And so you have to work even harder to prove your worth. So we need to avoid that at all costs by just making it happen. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to turn to somebody in Ruby, who I know made that happen in her executive life, and was very proud of her executive team of all women, and has also done that in other areas too, and has extended out into the race equality area as well. But if we don't tackle the female equality area, where we start out as 50-50 and turn ourselves into a minority, what chance have we got with race? So I'd like to ask for Ruby to give us some reflections.
I thought, just hearing the conversation today, I thought it would be quite good to give some of my reflections, having been a FTSE 250 CEO. And listening to the view on whether we go down the route of targets or quotas, thinking of me in my old role, I did really well on women on the executive team, but naturally what tends to happen is the easiest place to do it is finance and HR. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we have to accept that as this pipeline debate starts and really pressures up, that's great. Where I really struggled was on big operational roles, because I found myself working within industries that was so male-dominated bottom up that A, I couldn't get senior women to work in them, and B, I could get them 3-4 levels down, but they didn't always want to stay, because if it was an engineering business, it's just so male-orientated, they would rather be with a better fit of people. Or if it was security business, I had no hope. I had one female MD, and she did actually do pretty well. But it's just that's very tough environments. I think chief executives are going to need more help. Mm. I think it's going to be easy, as it was for boards, to turn around and say, we'll do targets. And we can do it on non-executives. But if you were to analyse, I think, the women who've gone into non-executive roles, they again will have certain backgrounds that have meant that that was where they chose to go. But certainly if it was finance, HR, law, whatever it may be, it was easier to fill some of those roles. That's the easy bit first, no different to the exec. But I think that there's going to be a different type of support needed to chief executives than just necessarily turning around and saying, it's going to be quotas or targets. I think chief executives need to collect the data to begin with. Data gathering, it's fantastic to hear Accenture do it. On my race review, only 48 out of the FTSE 100 can tell you what background their staff come from. And it's always interesting. Accenture can always do it. The accounting firms can always do it, but most of the FTSE can't do it. They cannot today publish their detailed pipeline all the way down the organisation either. So if a chief executive doesn't actually know what they're starting with, it's very difficult to make lasting change, would be my first point. So we need to help them work out how to gather data very, very simply actually in organisations. Then I think the next thing we need to do is make chief executives realise that they're going to be the sponsors of change. So where's Ema? Is Ema here? Ema's at the back. Ema's leading, as part of the Women's Business Council, the Men as Agents of Change programme. And I won't steal the thunder of what's coming over the next few months. But the general theme is very much to talk about chief executives sponsoring women at different levels through the organisation. Let's not go down 1 or 2 levels, because we're going to get, I think, again, too much tokenism. But you've got to go 3 or 4 levels down and work out what the real barriers are for them. And that's going to involve thinking very differently about flexible working. I can easily say, as a chief exec with young kids at the time, I needed my other half to stop what he was doing. One of us had to be around, and not everyone's in the place where they can afford to do it because they had a successful career. Most females I know that have got to chief executive do not have both partners working crazy hours. So that's a big consideration. Who's going to do the big job? Is it going to be both of you and have no family life? And those things really matter to us all. So I think there's got to be a debate about how you encourage the pipeline of women to realise that, okay, as you do get more senior, whether or not we like it or not, these are full-on intensive jobs that many women do not want to do. And we have to help them find a way, whether it's, look, go and have a sabbatical for 2 years while your kids are a certain age, come back. Okay, come back and do this for 18 months. Find a way to have every other week off. Do something. But we've got to crack that debate, because otherwise I don't think the pipeline will change. Then I would say we've got to think very differently for the pipeline around mentoring. I was very lucky because I had 2 male chief executives I'd worked for who, over the years, became those mentors, who taught me how to work on a FTSE board, but taught me quite a lot. And my old chief executive still speaks to me most weeks. He's kind of been a bit of a guiding force in everything I've done. I'm amazed at how many people I know don't get that. And don't have that 1 or 2 people they can go and talk to who can really help them get through that. And I think every chief exec needs to have for their emerging talent someone that can smooth their way, be the voice of conscience and support for them on the challenges they're having, because they're all challenging roles, as we know. I think the recruiters have a big part to play, not just in who we recruit, but actually in educating chief executives to say, now come on, there's some amazing people out there. Stop going for your normal tick box type of individual. Teach them why it needs to be deeper, because I do think a lot of chief execs don't have the time to necessarily get that, so the recruiters can really help. And then I think for me, the biggest thing that's got to change in organisations is unconscious bias. Because I will say, you can put whatever pipeline in we want of stats, but most people hire who they like and who they get on with. And the problem is, you don't change a pipeline in that way. You've got to be a team and get on. It's better to get on when you're a team, obviously. You therefore will not hire what you don't like at all. And you get that on race in a bigger way than you do on women, but you really still get it on women. Most women I meet, 2, 3, 4 levels down, say their biggest challenges are the bias. And it's the bias on the small things that knock their confidence, whether it's them being told, for example, you don't have the gravitas. You don't smile very often, one chief executive told me the other day. It's her biggest criticism from her chairman. You just don't smile. I said, don't smile if you don't want to smile. What is, but she's really taken that to heart as she becomes a chief executive. You don't really fit what we're looking for. It's all those things. And we've got to find a way for organisations to stop saying those things to our employees. Because that, I think, is one of the biggest things that stifles the pipeline. And I think it's those softer things that I think boards really have to help work on. Board pressure is useful. As I can tell you as a chief exec, if my nominations committee had gone on and on and on about me, about this for 10 years, we would have done things slightly differently. And the other pressure point is institutional shareholders, who haven't been mentioned today. They have a massive role. In 14 years of roadshows in the UK and the US, I was never once asked about pipeline. I've never been asked about diversity. I've been criticised for working on diversity because they've told me it's a soft issue and I shouldn't be doing it. And that is the city. And in 14 years, I've met only a handful of female fund managers, and I think I've met 2 people that were not white. And I think that, and so one of the recommendations of my race report was that the fund managers that own stocks should absolutely take diversity at the heart of what they do, and it's about what they invest in. But if they never ever ask a question of boards or chief executives, there won't be change. So I think that's the 2 points of pressure I would put on in a big way. And then finally, I think that for me, as you go through all this, I was always an aspirational targets person. I'm a very anti-quota person. However, and this is my however, I am beginning to think on the pipeline to force that change in the next 5 years. If we want the pipeline to be operational, big and managing directors, people that can run huge operations that are women, then I question whether whether quotas shouldn't be brought in earlier. And I've never said that. And I say that having watched so many women not be able to get that big job in the operational side, where I think that forcing of that, I think, could actually be quite useful. And then my final comment, and I will talk a bit about race. So I think race is important. I never wanted to talk about race. The last thing I wanted to do was talk about race because I look a bit different and I actually feel a bit mortified at times. And I walk into a room and realise that there aren't that many people that look like me. It's a bit more mixed today, which is fantastic. But I had a question for the audience. To say how little we understand in business about race, and how many people in this room have worked for somebody black? Hands up. More than the room I sat in the city last week with 300 women, where it was 3 people. So you cannot, and it's the same, how many of us have worked for women? I've never worked for a woman. Okay? Yeah, you see, so that's better now. That's much better. But unless you've got those mixes of experience and you've worked for someone or they work directly for you. At the Department of Education last week, I asked one question of the Permanent Secretary. We talk a lot about race. 27% of kids at primary school are of BAME background. Not one person on the Department of Education's direct reports is non-white in the Department of Education, and we're going to have to change it. No one senior is black in the Department of Education. No one is mixed. In terms of gender, it's better. But if we're serious about change, and I think the public sector do a great job in the UK, there's quite a lot of change they need to do as well. But I think I'm hopeful, because the good news is we're beginning to talk about it in a very open way. And I think having the conversations, having the networks to talk about is really good. But looking back at my time as a chief executive, I think supporting the chief executive with great ideas, great case studies, look, this is what really works, is going to be really important to get the pipeline to change.